The moment Victoria Hale stepped into the boutique, the atmosphere shifted. Her heels echoed sharply against the marble floor, and without even looking at anyone, she snapped her fingers toward the counter. Most customers browsed quietly. Victoria did not. At the register stood Daniel, a relatively new employee who had only been working there for 3 weeks. He noticed the tension instantly, not because she was loud, but because everyone else had suddenly gone quiet. Victoria placed a designer handbag on the counter and said it was defective. Her tone wasn't angry yet, but it carried the confidence of someone who expected immediate compliance. Daniel examined the bag carefully and saw no visible flaw. When he gently explained that the return period had expired, Victoria's posture stiffened. "Do you know how much I spend here?" she asked, her voice rising just enough to draw attention from nearby shoppers. Instead of apologizing or escalating, Daniel did something unexpected. He thanked her. "Thank you for being a loyal customer," he said calmly. "Let's look at this properly together." And for the first time since entering the store, Victoria paused. Victoria wasn't used to being thanked in moments like this. The calm response disrupted the confrontation she seemed prepared for. For a second, she looked almost uncertain, then quickly regained her sharp composure. Daniel carefully placed the handbag under the counter light and invited her to point out the issue. Instead of arguing, he handed her control of the explanation. The shift was subtle, but the tone of the conversation began to change. She hesitated before speaking, as if realizing she hadn't fully inspected the bag herself. A faint crease near the stitching became her focus, and she insisted it proved poor craftsmanship. Daniel leaned in closer, not to disagree, but to observe seriously. Other customers had begun watching quietly. The store manager, Alina, stepped halfway out of her office but didn't intervene. She seemed curious about how Daniel would handle this without escalating the situation. After examining the bag more closely, Daniel noticed something unexpected. The crease wasn't a defect at all. It was caused by how the bag had been stored. Instead of pointing that out directly, he gently asked Victoria how she had been keeping it. And suddenly, the tension shifted from accusation to explanation. Victoria straightened slightly and explained that she kept the bag in her car for convenience. As soon as she said it out loud, she seemed to realize what that meant. Heat, pressure, and tight storage could easily cause creasing, even in high-end leather. Daniel didn't correct her. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully and said, "That makes sense." The lack of blame caught her off guard again. She had expected resistance, not understanding. For the first time, her voice softened. "It shouldn't happen that easily," she added, but it sounded less like an accusation and more like uncertainty. The confrontation she had walked in with was slowly losing momentum. Alina, the manager, quietly returned to her office without saying a word. She wasn't worried anymore. What surprised her wasn't, to Daniel's politeness, it was how confidently he controlled the emotional temperature of the room. Daniel then offered something unexpected. "If you'd like, I can show you how to restore the leather so it looks new again." Victoria blinked. She hadn't come for guidance, she had come for authority. And now the power dynamic felt completely different. Victoria hesitated before agreeing, clearly torn between pride and practicality. Finally, she nodded once. As Daniel brought out a leather care kit from behind the counter, she realized she had never actually asked how to maintain the bag. She had only assumed it would maintain itself. Daniel began explaining the material patiently, showing her how temperature and pressure affect natural leather. His tone wasn't defensive. It was educational. What surprised Victoria most wasn't the information. It was that he treated her like a partner in solving the problem. As he worked gently over the crease, nearby customers resumed shopping, the tension dissolving almost completely. The scene she had unintentionally created was fading. But something unexpected replaced it: curiosity. Victoria watched closely as the leather slowly regained its smooth texture. "I didn't know that," she admitted quietly. It wasn't a dramatic apology, but it was the first time she spoke without authority in her voice. When the bag looked nearly new again, Daniel stepped back and said, "There's no charge." Victoria stared at him. She had come prepared to argue over money. Instead, she was walking away with something she hadn't expected: respect. Victoria didn't immediately pick up the bag. Instead, she looked at Daniel as if trying to understand him. "Why wouldn't you charge for it?" she asked. It wasn't suspicion this time, it was genuine curiosity. Daniel gave a small shrug. "Because it's easier to fix something than argue about it," he said simply. The answer wasn't rehearsed. And somehow, that made it stronger. For a moment, Victoria seemed ready to say something sharp, but the words didn't come. What replaced them was something quieter: reflection. She realized she had walked in expectant conflict, and instead she was being met with calm. As she reached into her purse, Daniel assumed she was finally preparing to pay. But instead of a card, she pulled out a business card and placed it gently on the counter. The name beneath, it wasn't just decorative, it belonged to someone influential. "I own 3 retail locations downtown," Victoria said evenly. "And I've been looking for someone who knows how to handle people, not just products." The room went still again, but this time, not because of tension. Daniel hadn't just resolved the complaint. He had unknowingly stepped into an opportunity. Daniel glanced at the business card, but didn't react immediately. Instead of excitement, his first feeling was hesitation. He had only just started this job, and the idea of leaving felt heavier than the opportunity itself. Victoria seemed to notice the pause. "I'm not offering you a position today," she clarified calmly. "I'm offering a conversation." The power in her voice was no longer sharp, it was measured. Elena, the manager, had quietly stepped closer again. Daniel expected tension, but instead she placed a supportive hand on the counter. "Whatever you decide," she said softly. "You handled that well." The approval he feared losing had never actually disappeared. Victoria picked up her restored bag and looked around the store once more. The scene she had created earlier now felt distant, almost unnecessary. "You reminded me of something," she admitted. After she left, Daniel slipped the business card into his pocket, not as an escape plan, but as a reminder. The day hadn't changed his job title. It hadn't made him instantly successful. Calm isn't weakness, and sometimes the strongest response in a loud moment is the one delivered gently.